Now let's get back to Joseph. Imhotep, one and the same. Picking up where I left off 2 weeks ago. Because last Wednesday night, we looked at a very strong possibility how the pyramid was built, the Great Pyramid. Not by aliens, not by angels, not by the present theories that are out there with using sleds and rollers and giant stone wheels. Not any of those things. But by casting. And the technology that I believe Joseph, inspired by God, was able to determine how it could be done, which not only explained the very large stone blocks, but how tight and close those blocks are to each other. You can even slide in a hair in the crack somewhere between the stone blocks. And gave a very plausible explanation. Which explains it. Using certain type of technologies to cast, like I said, and I'm not going to get into too much of what I already preached on. And that's where I left off last week. But 2 weeks ago, I was getting into why the Great Pyramid was a Great Pyramid designed by Imhotep, and some of the necessary skills that was necessary to have. Whether God gave him the skills, or some of these skills was passed on by his father or his grandfather, or even his great-grandfather who passed it on. Down to Joseph, and not just Joseph, but as you'll see tonight, other members of his family. With that, history experts now realize that, along with his other and vast knowledge and strengths, and he had plenty of those, Imhotep was also a great Egyptian temple designer. And not just a designer, an astronomer also. An astronomer. Sir Lockyer was first discovered the astronomical alignment of Egyptian temples, according to Peter Topkin's Secrets of the Great Pyramid. His most extensive studies involve the magnificent temple of Hathor at Dendera. As Tompkins report, the ceiling of the last rebuilt temple portrayed an enormous zodiac now in the Louvre Museum. Another inscription in the crypt of the temple indicated it had been built according to the plans of Imhotep. Now, for you that don't understand what plans this author is speaking of, is the plans of Dendera and the Zodiac. Imhotep had knowledge of the Zodiac, and there's several different types of Zodiac interpretations. And by the way, when I teach in the stars and something of that nature, I use the Denderian Zodiac. I think it's the most truthful and pure, to use, for lack of a better word, when understanding what the message is declaring when you look up and look at all the constellations. Another inscription in the crypt of the temple indicated it had been built according to the plans of Imhotep, the son of Path, who was the fabulous architect of the third dynasty, King Zoser. In Lockyer's opinion, the temple of Dendera may have been rebuilt at least 3 times since it was built. Lockyer's deductions about the refurbishing of the temples was to rekindle interest in the zodiac of Dendera. Lockyer quoted an old inscription which described the temple of Hathor at Dendera at the time of Khufu in the 4th dynasty. When the stars shone into the temple and mingled the light of her father Ra, and that's in Peter Tompkins' Secret of the Great Pyramid, describing the astronomical aspects of this giant zodiac, Tompkins says, the outer circle of the figures moving counterclockwise like the stars represents the 37 decans or 10-day weeks of the Egyptian year. The 12 arms of supporting figures, the 12 months of the year, according to Peter Tompkins, also be found in the Secrets of the Great Pyramid. Some of you are very familiar with the Great Secrets of the Pyramid by Peter Tompkins. Very ancient zodiacs were simply star maps. Star maps. Showing fixed star positions. But after the flood, some skywatchers became fearful of the planets, ascribing to them godly powers. Basically, becoming fearful of the planets, meaning they started worshiping, it led to started worshiping the creation instead of the creator. Soon these ancients began tracing the motion of divine planets against the zodiac, which became the forbidden art of astrology. Astronomers, on the other hand, compute heavenly changes. It is known that Imhotep constructed a temple as a device to do this very thing. In other words, a star map temple. A star map temple. This accomplishes not unlike Joseph, for he too used instruments of science as indicated in the book of Jasher. Well, let's look. I got my book of Jasher here. Let's look. You can find that if you have one. Jasher chapter 53, verse 18. This is when his brothers were wining and dining with him, and Benjamin was sitting at his throne, and he turns to Benjamin and has a conversation with them, and Benjamin tells him his offspring and who they were. And then you get to verse 18. It says, and he ordered them to bring before him. This is the book of Jasher. And he ordered them to bring before him, that's Joseph that is, his map of the stars, whereby Joseph knew all the times. In other words, he knew how to read the stars. And Joseph said unto Benjamin, I have heard that the Hebrews are acquainted with all wisdom. Remember, Joseph did not reveal himself at this point yet to his brothers who he really was. I have heard that the Hebrews were acquainted with all wisdom. Doest thou know anything of this? He's asking his brother, I know how to read the stars. I know how to map them across the sky. Here it is in whatever, papyrus or whatever they were using. I built a temple. Do you, not revealing to his brother who he really was, do you know anything about what I'm referring to? Since you are a Hebrew, and the Hebrew seems to have knowledge of this, and Joseph was a Hebrew, not an Egyptian, where did he learn it from? So what did Benjamin say? And Benjamin said, verse 19 in chapter 53 of the book of Jasher, and Benjamin said, thy servant is knowing also in all the wisdom which my father taught me. Yeah, Joseph, guess what? I know that kind of information also. I know all that wisdom that you proclaim to have. And Joseph said unto Benjamin, look now at this instrument, and understand where thy brother Joseph is in Egypt, who you said went down to Egypt. Interesting there, part right there. And Benjamin beheld the instrument with the map of the stars of heaven, and he was wise and looked therein to know where his brother was. And Benjamin divided the whole land of Egypt into 4 divisions, and he found that he who was sitting upon the throne before him was his brother Joseph. And Benjamin wondered greatly. And when Joseph saw that his brother Benjamin was so much astonished, he said unto Benjamin, what hast thou seen? And why art thou astonished? And Benjamin said unto Joseph, I can see by this that Joseph my brother sitteth here with me upon the throne. And Joseph said unto him, I am Joseph, thy brother. Reveal not this thing unto thy brethren. Behold, I will send thee with them when they go away, and I will command them to be brought back again into the city, and I will take thee away from them. Joseph tested his brother to see if he knew what he knew. Benjamin responded, yes, I know. And if the book of Jasher is accurate, he was able to tell. Now, wouldn't that be an interesting study? He would be able to tell where Joseph was even located because he believed he still was living, and he was living in Egypt, according to the book of Jasher. And then when he was able to divine, look at the map of the stars with the instrument of what he was using, guess what? He pinpointed to the exact location where Joseph was, there on the throne where he was at. The story goes on to tell that Benjamin, Joseph's little brother, also knew how to use the device with the star map. Here we have confirmed several vital suppositions. 1. In Imhotep, Joseph designed and used instruments of science. 2. The astronomical alignment of Egyptian temples was conceived by Imhotep / Joseph. 3. The knowledge of astronomy and wisdom of the sages had been handed down the family line from Abraham to his great-grandson Joseph. Remember, Abraham was told to tell the stars. Tell what? Tell the story of the stars, to remind him of the promise, because he was wondering why he didn't have his own seed yet a son coming from his loins. God had to remind him of what has already been declared. And if he would trust in him, he would trust what's already been proclaimed. He had the gospel of the stars. We have the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. Abraham probably learned it from Shem and Noah. It was passed down from Noah, Shem, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, to Joseph. And it sounds to me that Jacob also taught Benjamin. It doesn't sound like his other brothers were that interested because they didn't get brought up at all in the story. They might have known too. We won't know for sure. But it's a possibility they didn't know. Only Joseph and Benjamin. 2. The astronomical alignment of Egyptian temples was conceived by Imhotep Joseph. 3. The knowledge of astronomy and wisdom of the sages had been handed down the family line from Abraham to his great-grandson Joseph. 4. Joseph and Benjamin were tutored in these arts and sciences at an early age before either went to Egypt. 5. The Hebrews were renowned for their scientific wisdom, and the Egyptians were still somewhat ignorant of this knowledge. After making these observations, it is also conceivable to suggest that the knowledge of Abraham was handed down to him from pre-deluge times. This means that today's mystique of ancient Egypt did not come from Atlantis. It did not come from extraterrestrials. It did not come from wise Egyptian priests. Rather, it came from even more ancient Hebrew sages. Remember, Noah lived on both sides of the flood. And more than likely, that kind of knowledge would trace back all the way to Enoch. And maybe even further than that. Egyptian temples are not the only structures discovered to be astronomically aligned. After the Emperor Napoleon ordered Egypt surveyed and its ruins documented, scholars increasingly suspected that the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, incorporated astronomical alignments and even ancient scientific principles. Peter Tompkins once again writes, Professor Lockyer says that the earliest civilization in Egypt built temples at Anu or Heliopolis, oriented the heliacal rising of northern but non-circumpolar stars at the summer solstice. However, the Great Pyramids were built by a new invading race representing an advance in astronomical thought. However, the Great Pyramids were built by a new invading race representing an advance in astronomical thought, who used northern stars on the meridian and stars rising due east at the equinoxes. Peter Tompkins goes also to write, the subsequent break in Egyptian history between the 6th and 11th dynasties, between now the 6th and 11th dynasties, is associated by Lockyer with conflicts between these and two other races, which ended in a victory of the representatives of the old worship of Anu, reinforced by supporters from the south, so that the North Star and the South Star cults combine against the equinoctial cult. I propose that what Lockyer mistook for superior invading race was simply a superior person. I propose that what Lockyer mistook for a superior invading race was simply a superior person. Would not Joseph be acquainted with his great-grandfather Abraham, the greatest astronomer of antiquity? Then after Joseph's death, would not the old and new Anu cult switch back to the inferior alignment of method for lack of understanding the mathematics of the Sumerian Hebrew Joseph? This religious competition was destined to later cause a split between the 5th and 6th dynasties. In other words, soon after Joseph no longer was living on this planet. Thus far, based upon the evidence at hand, our conclusion remains and is reinforced. Imhotep and Joseph, the house of Hebrew sages, both known as Egypt's first vizier, first astronomer, and pyramid designer, were one and the same person. We have discovered Abraham in Egypt's history and Joseph in Egypt's documents. These records clearly establish that Abraham paralleled the time of dynasties 1 and 2. He journeyed to Egypt just as dynasty 2 began in Memphis and dynasty 1 moved south to Thebes. We saw how Abraham's grandson Jacob, later named Israel, went to Egypt twice. His first trip was during a famine in Canaan, when he arrived in Egypt in the midst of dynasty 2. Years later, Jacob's second trip was at the request of his son Joseph, who was already vizier of Egypt. Joseph, in turn, had arrived in Egypt during the reign of dynasty 3, King Zosers, the ruler who appointed him vizier over all the land of Egypt. The records prove that Joseph remained in this powerful post through the reigns of 4 pharaohs, encompassing the 3rd and 4th dynasties. It is interesting that there's a distinct change in the quality of construction in the top half of the Great Pyramid. One can reason that the great architect had at that time died, and as a consequence, quality control suffered. Archaeologist Petrie, referring to the Great Pyramid, said, "The original architect, a true one of accuracy and fine methods, must have ceased to superintend the work when it was but halfway done." Is this a picture of the time of Joseph's death? The great architect, now dead, leaves the inexperienced vizier Heman responsible for something that he knows little about, the task of completing a half-finished Great Pyramid. Before I say anything about that, I want to go back to something also interesting about this Great Pyramid. We here note that the Great Pyramid, or the mastaba, is surrounded by scores of other mastabas. Early Egyptian oblong flat-roofed tombs with sloping sides. Since the two words are obviously the same, well, they're just spelled a little bit differently, we pondered who adopted the word from whom. We would at first assume that the enslaved Hebrews adopted the word mastaba from the Egyptians. However, the word also applies to the stone Joseph's father, Jacob, used for a headrest at a time when Jacob received the powerful dream of a staircase to heaven. In Genesis 28:18, it reads, "And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar," or a mastaba, "and poured oil upon the top of it." In Genesis 28:22, "And this stone, which I set for a pillar," or in Hebrew the mastaba again, "shall be God's house. Of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee." Genesis 28:22. Ironically, this was the very dream when Joseph saw angels of God, Jacob, saw angels of God ascending and descending the stairway to heaven in Genesis 28:12. As we already proposed, this vision is what must have inspired Jacob's son to design the first pyramid. Of course, I already showed you that pyramid. It's the Saqqara pyramid in the Zoser complex, the step pyramid. The legend of Jacob's pillar stone. And he, Jacob, in Genesis 28:11, lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows and laid it down in the place for sleep. That's in Genesis 28:11. The legend persists that the stone used by Jacob as a pillow was later carried by the Israelites through the wilderness journeys. Tradition says that Jeremiah later carried to Ireland along with 2 royal daughters. From that point, it is said that the kings and queens of Ireland were crowned while standing on the Leophil, as this stone came to be named. After the coronation stone was taken to Scotland to crown Fergus the Great in AD 513, it was renamed the Stone of Scone. In AD 1297, the stone was taken to Westminster Abbey, where Edward I placed in it a custom-made chair. The royalty of England have since been crowned on this chair, last of which was Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. Although this legend has been exploited by certain Anglo-Israel type religions, the history of the legend seems to have veracity. Now, I don't think it's been that exploited by the Anglo-Israel type religions, as this author says. But it's interesting. This stone, which now still is located in the Great Britain area of the world, the Stone of Scone. Now, when Jacob joined his son Joseph in Egypt, not only was his pillar stone memorialized, but Joseph incorporated this memorial concept into his first pyramid. The burial chamber of King Zoser. As the chamber was enlarged, the Hebrews associated with the memorial mastaba because it incorporated the holy dream of the stairway to heaven. Now, we'll never know if that was true or not, but it's plausible. I propose that the successful completion of the step pyramid only stimulated collaboration between Jacob and his son on succeeding projects. The mastaba, or the memorial idea, was expanded to incorporate not only God's promise to the Hebrew posterity, but also the accumulated wisdom and knowledge of the ancient family of sages. As the 4th dynasty came forth in Egypt, still having the luxury of almost unlimited manpower and wealth, the world's greatest memorial was born, the Great Pyramid. In all likelihood, the Great Pyramid, with all its mystery and perfection, is also tied to Jacob's vision. For Jacob's own description of his vision is as startling as the Great Pyramid itself. In Genesis 28:17, and he, Jacob, was afraid, and said, "How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So, house of God and gate of heaven. A mastaba incorporating pi 3,000 years before its rediscovery in modern times, the Great Pyramid used the mystic techniques of the golden section and mathematical proportions to display the mean density of the earth, the distance to the sun and moon, the volume of the earth above sea level, the mean temperature of the earth, the mean ocean level, the Earth's weight, the angle of Earth's curvature, the 25,800-year precessional cycle, and multitudes of other scientific details. Supported with this data, modern scholars also began detecting biblical specifics within the measurements of the Great Pyramid. There came to be known as the Pyramid Prophecies, or Pyramidology. This was based on each inch of the interior passageways represents a year in history. Primarily, it was the pyramidology which stimulated the quest for who originally designed the pyramid. Due to the number 365 incorporated in the structure, most speculated the pre-flood Enoch, who lived 365 years, was its architect. In our model, it could still be postulated that Enoch designed the original plans, but this hypothesis is dampened by the progressive evolution of pyramid design. Although Enoch may have been the custodian of the sciences of the earth, the architect to incorporate these sciences into a pyramid form was surely Joseph and his advisor, Israel, or Jacob. The ancient historian Herodotus reported that there were strangers abiding in Egypt, shepherds keeping themselves about the construction site during the building of the Great Pyramid. This is Herodotus' own words. The ancient historian Herodotus reported that there were strangers abiding in Egypt, shepherds keeping themselves about the construction site during the building of the Great Pyramid. Why would they keep themselves about the construction site during the building of the Great Pyramid? Could they have been the foreman? Could Joseph have been the architect along with his father? Or if not his father as a counselor, and Joseph the designer of the architect of the Great Pyramid? And Hebrews as foremen, making sure the work got done according to how Joseph laid it out to be done? According to the priests whom Herodotus consulted, the Egyptians attributed this edifice to the shepherds rather than to the king Khufu. Herodotus says they commonly call the pyramids after Philotian, which is a shepherd who at the time fed his flocks about the place. Philotian of Philistus is a name from Philistia. We might be tempted to think that these shepherds were Joseph's brothers or other family members, for indeed they were from the land of Philistine or Canaan. Although Joseph's older brothers were likely dead or well aged by the time of the greatest pyramid construction, their offspring could well have been present, though. Calculations indicate that Joseph possibly died about halfway through the 20 years approximately of this pyramid's construction. And if Herodotus is even close to being accurate, it could explain how the quality in construction changed a little bit more than halfway up that Great Pyramid there in Giza. Even though Imhotep built the step pyramid, tradition assumes that he retired or even died by the time construction began on the Great Pyramid. Yet, as just shown, which I already read to you, one queen lived in previous teachings. One queen lived through the reigns of Zoser's son Senefru, then Khufu, and later Khafra. In all probability, Imhotep 110-year lifespan just as easily spanned from Zoser to Khufu. In this time frame, it becomes feasible that Imhotep or Joseph designed all the major pyramids except the second and third. The one pyramid possibly designed by Imhotep, the step pyramid, had step sides and an ornate interior. The next 5 were true pyramids with no ornate decor on the interior chambers. Could he also have been designed by the same architect? Not knowing the cause for the architectural change, should we speculate that the change was due to a new architect, or to a change in aesthetics? Or was it perhaps a religious change, or even a switch to a new scientific museum system, as many scholars propose? I propose a simple and straightforward answer, that Imhotep designed Zoser's pyramid with ornate detail requested by King Zoser, while the other pyramids were prototypes of Imhotep's ultimate achievement. I propose a different theory. I propose that it was never designed to be Zoser's burial site. It just became that when it's no more useful for what it probably was designed for, and that is in some way connected to the 7 years of plenty and where to store the grain, and also during the 7 years of famine. The Zoser complex was a complex where people from not just Egypt, from other countries came to buy grain, came to buy food. And if you look at the interior of the Zoser complex and see some of the intricate designs of how it could be used as also a system of distributing grain, the food source that was accumulated, it's not that far-fetched to think that its original purpose was for those reasons. And then when it was said and done, and no longer there was a famine, no longer needed to store grain, it became useful for another purpose. Could it possibly have been a design by Joseph prior to even Jacob even arrived on the scene? My guess it was that he built that before even Jacob came on the scene. Could Jacob have been part of the Great Pyramid construction as a consultant? Sure. As far as the Zoser complex, I think that was all Joseph. I think listening and hearing his father tell the stories of how he met the angels God going to and fro, what looked like to him like a step ladder, could have been Joseph's interpretation in a monument form of what his father's dream was about. We'll never know the answers 100% for sure, but it's fun to speculate. It's fun to think that these are all possibilities. And we don't have to rely on alien, outer space creatures coming to this planet to help mankind build some monuments, or maybe they were not involving mankind, they'd build themselves, or Enoch and angels, or whatever. These are real people doing real things, accomplishing real amazing things. I believe the Great Pyramid, inspired by God. God made sure he was schooled in pyramid building before he tackled the greatest achievement probably this world has ever seen, if they understand what that Great Pyramid is communicating, even up to this day. And I think that I'll leave it there for now. And I might continue on another also possibility before I move on to Moses concerning the story about the Great Pyramid, Joseph's involvement, and possibly others before moving on to Moses, but we'll see. Now, are you interested? Hopefully you are. I think it's fascinating. I think there has a lot to be said about looking to God's Word, reading the Scriptures, using other sources like the Book of Jasher, putting it all together, along with collaborating a timeline that makes sense, outlines exactly when these things happened, not some cockamamie idea of 5,000 years, 4,000 years, 2,000 years, 2,700 years, and more in the time span of 1700 BC when it calibrated right according to an accurate timeline, which happens to line up with biblical scriptures, which proves biblical scriptures were right all along, and the world's taking a sweet time catching up. But catching up they're doing, whether they want to admit it or not. I find it very interesting. Hopefully you do too. Let me know if you are. Play a song.